section. Okay, so Dr. Pauline Crawford, the ambassador of magical conversations, entreprenologist, educator, um, an innovator in collaborative behavior and in building people development as an economic imperative that produces sustainable, healthy, and profitable businesses. Pauline helps people learn the art of conversation, understand the language of behavior, know how to increase their professional presence and expand their success with a new perspective. A sociologist, a business psychologist, image consultant, and entrepreneur, Pauline Crawford is founder of and chief executive of Corporate Heart. She is the inventor of Gender Dynamics and the Wellness Map, both designed and stimulate healthy cultures. And this is my reminder to wear glasses next time I come to this meeting. And this just in for my son. When I get close to the journal, I feel like I am going to throw up. Okay, so my son is enjoying doing journal writing every single day. So he goes ahead and makes sure that I'm up to date on his feelings. So just to give you a little plug, Pauline, thank you. He overheard that and he says, I'm going to share my communication right now.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Andrea. And I'm delighted to be here with all of you. And as Ken so rightly read about me, it sounds an awful lot, but essentially I love to help people have magical conversations. So what does that mean? For me, it's about conversations that have no judgment and no anger and no coercion. So those are the three basic rules. So in fact, what it is that we bring our knowledge, our experience, and our imagination together, which is actually the mantra of the university that my husband and I run, which Ken alluded to, and Andrea are both doing their PhDs in entreprenology. But it's a very interesting concept because one of the main tools in it, which I would love to share with you, which is around how men and women actually get on with each other or don't get on with each other. And I have to be very careful because in England, when you say how people get on with each other, it doesn't have a sexual illusion. It's actually very straightforward. But I remember the first time I actually said that in an interview, and the American audience sort of looked at me. And it's not about dating, although it could be applied to dating. But essentially, I'm fascinated by the group here because there's 9 of us and there's 3 women. So there's a 66 to, whatever it is, there's 2/3 are men and 1/3 is women, which is actually the normal balance you find in many corporate environments in boardrooms. If they have a balanced boardroom, they still don't have 50-50. So we're well represented here because many places there's only men in charge. And my dream is that we can create a new understanding and a new narrative about how we work together, how we understand each other, and how we understand the misunderstandings, because that's one of the very important places. Have any of you ever been misunderstood by somebody of the other gender? I'm sure that's a possibility. Are all men the same?
No.
No, good. Are all women the same?
No.
But are men and women different to each other?
Most of the time.
Yes. Okay, so in order to have conversations where we actually have no judgment, we have to look into some of the stereotypes and the biases that maybe are holding us back. And my view is that we can actually get to really value each other, because the whole thing about valuing differences is important, not valuing or seeking to understand difficulties. It's about valuing differences. And when differences are not understood, that's where we get difficulties. Okay? So first of all, I want to introduce you very briefly to my philosophy, which is sitting here behind my shoulder here, is that everybody in the world is valuable. So the green arrow is about who are you? Who am I? What's the me in each of us as a male or a female of different types? And how do we get into the blue arrow, which is all the relationships we have? So whether you're running a business or you're dealing with customers or you're just getting on with your family at home, you're trying to understand everybody, that's in the blue arrow. And you can't get into the blue arrow unless you know who you are. That's my theory. And it goes back to what we do on the aeroplane, is that we have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves in order to be able to support other people. The third arrow, the red arrow, is your community. it's your family, it's your nation, it's your world. So here, this is the team network. This is your red arrow. So whatever you feel like when you turn up on this meeting will influence the way you relate to each other, and it will influence the whole. And as we aim to attract other people to team network, then we still have to understand the message comes from the me in each one of you. As I said, we've got 3 women and 6 men, and we're all different. So how do we get to understand each other? And I'm going to give you a very quick view of a map, which I call the gender dynamics map. And in fact, I talk a lot about gender dynamics intelligence. So you all know about EQ, you all know about IQ. You've probably heard of SQ, which is spiritual intelligence, but this is about gender dynamics intelligence, because we get a lot of discussions about men and women and how do we manage each other, what are we saying, what are the messages, and essentially we need to have a framework. That was my point of view when I came to this some 20 plus years ago. I thought I need to understand myself in a way of a map that we could have for a new GPS to talk to each other and relate to each other. So I'm going to show you this on my handy whiteboard here. And I've used some shapes in order to understand men and women. So I'd like your input as well. For men, I've put you in a square. I hope you like that. And for women, I've put you in a circle. Now this is fundamental because men are much more transactional and task focused. I know you've all got emotions and you're very enlightened men, but essentially you like things to be either or. Get the task done, ask a question, get an answer, okay? Now you know women are different. We're much more circular, we're much more hormonal, we're much more emotional, but you're all emotional as well. But using this as an illustration, I started understanding the fundamental differences between men and women. So I'll give you an example. For instance, men tend to ask questions respecting an answer. Women ask questions in order to expand their knowledge of the universe. Isn't that true? I hope you ladies agree with me. And if you've ever come across a situation when you've had a female in your life who appears to be asking you a question, men, and you go to answer it, and she says, no. Don't find the answer for me. I can do it myself. And I've got Wilbert is laughing away down there. But this is a truth. Now, not all men are the same and not all women are the same. So we have to put another dimension in here. And this is where it starts becoming fun, because you've all heard of the energies masculine and feminine. Yes? So masculine energy, I'm going to refer to as being, it's very direct. It's very logical. It's an energy which says thinking first, feeling second. Feminine energy is much more intuitive. It's just like yin and yang. So this is the yin, this is the flow, this is where we build relationships. So women in their circle make a lot of effort to make relationships, but within that, they can have masculine or feminine energy. So put another circuit around it. So now we have this. So this is the circuit where this is masculine, this is feminine, this is male, and this is female. So we've now got extra capacity to put all the men in our life around here and all the females in our life around here. To make this simple, I'm going to give you 4 archetypes so we can understand what's going on here. So if you have a masculine-minded male, I'm going to call him a ruler. So the masculine-minded male, which you may or may not be men, is somebody who is male, but have an extra level of masculine directness, if you like. They live in a box and they're very bullet point, and you might get impatient with lots of conversations or a presentation that's too long. So I'm very aware of that. So likewise, you have masculine-minded females. And guess what? I know this woman because that's me. I spent a lot of my life trying to work out what I was as a female because I was always very masculine in my energy. So she's called a magician, and I'll show them in a minute. So then, being a mathematician, which I am, I decided we had to have a code for feminine females, and I call them sovereigns. Okay. So I'm going to test you in a minute. What was the other female archetype? The magician. So you've got magician and a sovereign. So we've got a ruler who is the masculine male. So what about the feminine-minded male, the gentle, intuitive Nelson Mandela? He's on this scale. He's a FM, and I'm going to call him a philosopher. He's, if you like, a thinking, feeling man, whereas the ruler is action man. Now, you might be a mixture of these two men, and you might be a mixture of these two women, the females. But the idea in understanding these archetypes is so that if we now look at the framework, if I know who I am, then I ought to know how to deal with all the other people. So, Ken, I think I worked with you with this, that you were the feminine-minded male down here, the intuitive-minded male. Had a lot of energy. Now you're definitely a male, so you take the whole spectrum, but there's that energy of feeling and intuition and creativity. And Andrea, we worked with this as well with you, where we said, actually, you were very much in the middle of the female spectrum. So Andrea picks up a lot of energy, sometimes as a magician, sometimes as a sovereign. So you can be a mixture of both. But one of the things to be aware of is when you're dealing with other people is not only who you are, but who is somebody else. So how do you deal with the masculine male if you're a sovereign, and vice versa, here or across the grid? Okay. Now in the time allowed, we're only going to have a very simple glance at this, but if that makes sense to you, let me reflect on a story about magical conversations, because you imagine these characters in the room. There's the ruler, there's the philosopher, they're both men. There's the magician and the sovereign, both women, and they're aiming to have a magical conversation, which is open-ended and magical, and it's no judgment. How is the masculine male going to deal with it? The masculine male may have a tendency to think, well, I need an answer, I need some attention, so he'll be maybe over assertive. So not everybody comes to conversation in the same way. Does that make sense to everybody?
Of course.
So one of the goals is there's two levels here. One is to say, respect that men and women are now in the place of work and the place of life on an equal basis. Now, we know that that is not necessarily equal out in the corporate world, but in the entrepreneurial world, there are many, many women who are entrepreneurs and many who will become entreprenologists. What we're looking at here is how do we structure a new narrative for business where we can understand the squareness and the straight line attention that men give to things and the circular embracing emotion and integrity and intuition and creativity from the females. Now, what I'm going to tell you is maybe sound like a shock, but I want to tell you how these characters behave when they're bad, because we often see bad behavior. So the the masculine male, do you remember the ruler? When he's behaving badly, he can be the bully. And the feminine-minded male, when he's thinking too much, he can appear to be a bit too wimpish. And I mean that with kindness, because we're all good and bad. The sovereign can sometimes get so controlling with her territory that she becomes a victim to her own glory. And the magician can be a bitch. So when we understand there's good and bad, and I see you're laughing there, we recognize bad behavior very easily. What we need to do is to understand how to deal with it. Women love to talk a lot more than men do. So one of the key things is recognizing, for instance, when women ask questions, they're not always asking for your attention, guys. They're actually asking you to listen to them and to be in a place of understanding that we need to explore more, because we've got this relational template going on. I want to give you an example which maybe will illustrate this in the corporate world. There was and this is a true life piece of research, there was in real life, this was a male CEO, and he invited his top 6 men in, and he said, I want you to sign this without knowing what I'm going to ask you to do. And whatever I ask you to do, I want you to do it. So they all said yes, because they wanted to please the boss. So they all signed to this. And the deal was that each one of them had to talk to an aspiring, fairly senior woman coming up through the ranks once a week. And the order was that they would say, hello, how are you? What are you doing? And then they had to button their lip and not say anything for 10 minutes and listen to them. And then they weren't allowed to critique. They could then say, thank you, that sounds really interesting. Will you come and present to my team? How many of you guys would have done that without solicitation? You would have just agreed to it? Half of the men didn't really want to do it. Some of them did, but all of them obeyed because they had that hierarchy challenge. What was interesting was that in 6 weeks, the culture in the business changed, because the men realized this was actually quite a good idea. The women felt able to speak, and the whole situation shifted from being the men in charge, the women, to being together. That to me was a really good example of the differences purely between men and women. And I'm going to ask the two ladies on here, do you think women would have been as obedient?
Can you repeat that again?
Do you think the women would have been as obedient to just obey an order without knowing what they were going to do? I think possibly not. What I love about you guys is that often you are very instructional. If something looks like it's going to be a big win and then you do it and it works, then you can own it and then you get to a better place. Yeah? So it is a real life example, and it shifted the whole culture of that business to being much more on a conversational basis. Because prior to that, the women were resisting sharing what they were doing because they felt they were under the gun of control. So in a nutshell, this is what I work with. I work with the idea that now that we're in a place where men and women are equally involved in creating our new economies, our new businesses, and I've just written an ebook called Magical Conversations in a Crisis, which puts this proposition forward, because I believe that there are many businesses that are extremely stressed by our current crisis, but they don't know how to deal with the people side of things because it hasn't been in the boss's remit to actually manage the people and the culture side while he's been in a buoyant economy. Now in COVID, he must take care, and he or she must take care of their people. So this map is a fundamental way to help people understand themselves in relationship to how other people are on a male, female, masculine, feminine basis. And the plus point of this is that when they get into a magical conversation, they can be far more creative, as in that example. They can be far more creative, and creativity is going to be the shift that we need in our current COVID situation. So I'd love your questions on this now, because I've given you a whole lot of stuff at the moment, but essentially I'd like to hear your view on how you think this might apply to something that you're involved in, if there are any difficult relationships in the workplace.
I don't know about the workplace, but I'm married.
Married to my boss.
I think we do all learn some of these skills through our relationships, our personal relationships as well, I would think.
Yes.
I know I have.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what you said hits home just because my husband and I have a construction business. So, working together, there's definitely a lot of the things that you were saying just definitely hits, depending with his personality and my personality and how he approaches things with me, how I approach things with him. We've had to learn over the last 28 years how to make it work.
And I think relationships can be like that. They can be like that, but they can be like this. And they can be also like this. So there were different relationships around how we connect. And as women, how we assert ourselves without being bossy, but how men understand our need to be assured of our value. So we've all got values to bring together, and they're different. I don't believe we're all going to be the same. Any other questions from you guys?
Do you think that that some of these challenges that the boardroom is facing, I would think there's a lot of learning that's already taken place. Like, I could see this really being relevant, say 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But I would think that companies today, if they haven't started figuring some of these things out, they might be in trouble, because there is a lot more women in leadership positions and in the boardrooms, and
Yes.
and they better be learning these skills. And if they haven't, they should be looking to somebody like you to enlighten them.
Well, I thank you for that. I think probably there are lots and lots of companies that are doing it well, but sadly there are a lot of companies that are not doing it well. And the figures prior to COVID were very challenging in terms of major organizations. If you looked at the Fortune 500 in the US, there were 30 women as CEOs out of 500. And not all of them had a mixed team. So and often you would get maybe one woman at the top, a male layer of leaders, and then a lot of females in the workforce. A lot of that is very congested at the moment, and a lot of uncertainty. And then the medium-sized companies, where I believe that's where we can shift the energy, because they are middle-sized, and often they have got women involved, but maybe not as many as they could, or understand the dynamics that would make it more sustainable longer term. So I'm working with this with a crisis management group, where the ebook will actually identify for the CEO how he could take more energy from all of his people, and especially the masculine and feminine energy, because we need that for relationship building. So I think we haven't got there yet, but it's the shift is here, and that is the most important thing. Do you see that in the companies that you're working with?
Well, most of my clients are very small businesses, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a lot of personal experience. I've always just been a single
Yes.
entrepreneur, so I have to. My masculine and feminine side of me both battle each other all the time.
I get a good sense of your feminine energy. You've got a good sensitivity. I think the shift has come in the last 3 decades, has come because of technology, obviously entrepreneurship, but also because women have changed the numbers in terms of being out there in the workplace. One of the things I believe women have brought to work is life. So women have always had to deal with life in the sense of their hormonal makeup, their family makeup, they're managing other people, providing, protecting. And now that's balancing out, and we require men to also come in and do many of those things as well. That's what I love about you, Ken, when you talk about your son and how you've engaged him. And those of you who've got children and you're in lockdown or you've been taken out of the workplace, there's a whole new sensitivity about men and women working together. And as you said, Cheryl, that working with your other half as well, whether it's a partner or just a partner, it takes thinking about, because emotions come to the fore. One of the things about the map is that it will provide a new dialogue for if there are difficulties. So very often I've solved people's problems without the problem person in the room. And that's a great advantage. You look curious there, Dan. What I mean by that is, when you use the map, you can identify by conversation, the coaching conversation, who the other person is that you are currently having a difficulty with. So I had a gentleman who had trouble with his female boss, who was head of department at school, and he was head of department, she was head of school, and they just weren't getting on. He didn't have to bring her into the room in order to solve it. We could analyze it here with the map, and he could go away with a scheduled idea of what to do. And all of my clients always come back with a good result. So that's good. You haven't got to face up to what you perceive to be the difficult person, who, remember, is not a difficult person, but the difficult situation. And you don't necessarily need to tell them why it works. They will just know it works.
It's curious. Last week, I think it may even just been last Thursday, the last time we met, we had a personality type, and he kind of had the disc thing going, and was talking about the different personality types and so forth. So I found this, sort of familiar and similar, but then you add in the male female element, which makes it quite interesting.
Well, it is, because there is, and I've worked with a lot of the profiling tools. The profiling tools help you to understand more of your identity, but your core behavior. So imagine with the map, the imprint of the male square is like a PC, and the circle is like a Mac. There's two operating systems. We're running programs across them, which, as we know with a PC and a Mac, we can do Windows, we can do different, but the issues when they go wrong are usually in the operating pattern, not in the conversation. And sometimes we don't know how to admit to each other what those issues are. And so that's my goal, is to not take away our differences, but that we value our differences in order to create the relationships that we want, which make us more synergistic with each other. So that's the goal.
Yeah, my wife has commented many times that together we make one good brain. And you could sort of look at a boardroom that same way. You all bring your strengths and weaknesses together and complement and balance each other out.
Well, that's right. And that's the other big shift, is that and I don't mean for you guys particularly, but we have gone from a shift of a very male-dominated corporate world to one which is entrepreneurial and much more flexible and interactive between masculine and feminine energy. So the shift is really huge. And now we've got the COVID shift. And the companies, I believe, that will not just survive, but thrive, will understand the value of diversity and inclusion, especially when it comes to the male and female mix.
Do you have an assessment that you are willing to offer people so they can find out where they land and also how to play?
I'm currently just working on the assessment to develop a gender dynamics app. But part of the assessment is, interestingly enough, is our physicality. And I'm just drilling that down, is that when you've got more masculine energy, you often have more straightness in your physique. So in your face and in your body. So if I took a Pierce Brosnan over Tom Hanks, if you can picture the two, Pierce Brosnan is much more angular, Tom Hanks is much more central. Tom Hanks has a very long forehead, Pierce Morgan has a short one. There are features in our physical body that relate to the way we are behaviorally. So at the moment, Ken, I'm developing that. I have some pictures, though, that I can send with the map and the body types round, so you can have a guesstimate about who and what you are. And I'm developing that at the moment. And I have a book, I have one book out at the moment, Magical Conversations, but I also have another one coming out on the gender dynamics itself. But I could definitely send you a map that you can play around with yourselves.
Well, you play your cards right and you get this work finished. We might even let you have another doctorate.
Absolutely. And one of the things I just wanted to explain is that the doctorate is about your life work. It's about the credentials of everything you've done in your life, not what you did necessarily at college. That comes part of it, but it's all about everything in your life. And this is why Andrea and Ken are having a fabulous time presenting their life history for that award. And I think that's where entrepreneurship is going to save our economies and our societies and make the world a very different place. Are there any other questions?
Ted,
I've
thank you for holding all your questions. Gilbert, do you have a question?
Yeah, I actually do. Oh, before I ask that, I was laughing because I have 3 daughters. So yes, I know all about them talking and just being quiet out of self-defense. I just sit there and just listen and say, okay.
Well, can I ask you a question then? Are your 3 daughters the same?
Oh, geez, no.
No. So what the thing is quite fascinating is in families, we tend to find those different, you can see different levels of masculine, feminine energy in the daughters and in your sons. And it helps you to understand how to deal with them in different ways than we might have normally just dealt with them all the same. And that's a very important facet of my work. So I currently work in the business world, but I would love to apply this to the world of schooling, education, of all sorts of diversities across the world, because you see this in the playground and you know who the kids are. To teach them how to manage each other at that core level would change the world and make them all smile. So that's where, for me, it fits in with the smiling movement, which is something where I connected with Ken and Andrea originally, because I've always imagined my future, I will develop a Smile Foundation, where Smile will be the core curriculum for parts of the learning. And that was about sound, movement, imagination, listening, and energy. So that was the letters of Smile. Remember that, Ken? We still have to do that.
Yes, we do.
Well, you know, my question was in terms of seeing how COVID has changed everything, as we can testify to the, you know, the virtual meetings we're doing. Do you see that as being more of a benefit in speeding up this process, or just more of a hindrance? So,
do you mean actually having to be on screen all the time?
yes.
Yes. Well, I think there's a lot to learn about being on screen as well. You know, how to actually interface with people. You know, often you find people who come on the screen, but they, you know, they start looking away, or they have the screen up here, or they don't. And so communication is happening everywhere. So this map helps us to communicate on screen as well. And I think that it's really important to understand the differences in, especially like with three daughters, as they grow up, how do they refer to life differently? How will their perspectives change? So for any of you who have children, this is also a really good tool for understanding differences. Thank you for that question. And also on screen, you're looking at faces. So once you understand the analysis, you can actually then analyze by faces.
All right.
Well done.
Well, thank you very much, Pauline. Very good.
Well, it's a complex subject, but this is a quick journey into it. And I would love you